with a difference.
Looking for a new job opportunity? Let Strategic Recruitment Solutions Inc. help you maximize your potential. Visit them at 230 Camp Street, Lacytown, Georgetown, obliquely opposite the New Citizens Bank. Strategic Recruitment Solutions. New ideas, better HR.
It is 19 hours 30 all across Guyana, and you've made the right choice by tuning into Kaiju Radio, the radio with a difference. Yes, 99.1 and 99.5 FM. And it is time to enter Room 592 with Yog Mahadeo and Leonard Gildarie this evening as their special guests, Mr. Gerry Gouveia and Mr. Kit Nascimento of the Private Sector Commission. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening to you, sir. And it's wonderful to see your guest here. Leonard, my co-host, welcome. Capt.Gerry Gouveia and Mr. Kit Nascimento, private sector, but operating as the observer team for the Private Sector Commission. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. So let me just say, all across Guyana, the Caribbean, in the USA, UK, Canada, all over the world, wherever you're coming in from and you're joining us on this Room 592, welcome to our show tonight, our discussion where we unleash the truth. Mr. Gildarie, how are you, sir, tonight?
Pretty good. I see some young men over there, younger men than you and I, so I'm in a good mood tonight to take on these young men.
Wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, over the past 2-3 days, we had first Mr. Vincent Alexander from GCOM, Commissioner Vincent Alexander, and we discussed some very important and critical points with regards to his views of how these elections are happening. And if you would recall that quite importantly, Mr. Alexander stated that he believes GCOM was, to use his words, given basket to fetch water. And while I disagreed with him from that perspective, which we discussed on show, the position of Mr. Alexander remains, based on what we discussed 2 nights ago, that not all of GCOM's officers that were employed across the various polling stations were above board. Last night we had Commissioner Sais Gunraj, and his position was quite different in those 2 aspects. Tonight, however, we're going to have a very different perspective. We're going to ask the people who have been there looking on. They are the observers or one of the observer team. Mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind everybody, we are seeing different narratives across this country every day. We are seeing so many different things being said each and every day. Day one, it was one set of persons said they have won these elections. Day two, another set of persons said we have an unassailable lead. Day three, we got Mr. Mingo's famous or infamous numbers. Since then, this country has gone down and is staring into the abyss. We have had numerous permutations, some of them quite unbelievable. And today, we are where we are, where Mr. Aubrey Norton has said this evening that he believes, and he was speaking on behalf of his party, he believes these elections were rigged, there was fraud. And so I found that an amazing thing, that having said you won the election from day one and you were prepared to swear in, so many days later, you were saying these elections were rigged. In addition, just before I come to our 2 guests, the Kaito News, I believe you guys did well, Leonard. One of the reporters asked him, if you are saying there's so much fraud in this election and so much problems, and you are told you have won, will you be swearing in? And he said, he then deflected, I believe, and he said that he would wait until GCOM so decides. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for 30 seconds more, let me tell you this. Everybody has conveniently forgotten that on polling day, when you and I were going into the polling stations to cast our ballots, there were GCOM officers, there were officers from every party, and there were also local and international observers. And so it is very important that the observers have their say of what happened on polling day and thereafter. And tonight, we have two gentlemen that have not only been observers in these elections, I have been with them in a previous reincarnation of myself when we were doing observer work for previous elections. And in all those elections, alongside with the Electoral Assistance Bureau, they called it exactly how they saw it. Gentlemen, welcome to this room 592, where we unleash the truth. Before I go, I ask you to tell us about your experiences. Capt.Gerry Gouveia, sir, I want to come very hard at you. There has been a lot of accusations made to you on your person, on your personal life. This is the age of accusation, but a lot of things have been said about you, Captain, that you are pro-PPP, you are pro-Jagdeo, and so that you're not independent. Sir, before we get into any discussion, how can this nation then accept you if you are pro-PPP? Let's put that out of the way. Tell us your thoughts, sir.
Thank you very much, Yog. I first of all wanted to remind Gildarie that sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. When he referred to the fact that myself and Kit Nascimento is young men on this side of the table. But to your question, Yog, and thanks for asking the question. You know, I came from a family in Guyana when they had three political parties. You had the PPP, the PNC, and the United Force. And I came from a Portuguese family, a Guyanese family, that was very pro-United Force. We did not like the PPP, or my family. I was a young boy, and my orientation, my family did not like the PPP because they were supposed to be leftist leaning. And they did not like the PNC because they were always very loud, and sometimes people were afraid of violence and so on. So we were very pro-United Force. And as the years went on, as you very well know, the United Force then collated with the PNC and formed the government in 1964. And I was still a young boy. I was only born in 1955, so that was when I was 10 years old or just about. And then I grew up, and when my family was leaving for Canada, I really somehow had an affinity for Guyana. And I went into the Guyana National Service, and I planted cotton and picked cotton and cleaned toilets. And I did that alongside all Guyanese. And I was so proud of the Guyana National Service. And I was so impressed with Forbes Burnham's vision of creating a Guyana for all Guyanese, where social cohesion was no longer just some kind of fallacy. It was something we were living. We were living together in the Guyana National Service. Mm-hmm. And then I got a Government of Guyana scholarship, and as part of that conditionality, I became a Guyana Defense Force GDF officer and pilot. And I served alongside many of the people today that are in government.
Right.
And I was always very proud of my service in the Guyana Defense Force. But I will tell you, in those years, I remember living through the hardships. And I remember when I finally got my children and so on, we got married, to get food stuff for them, it was very, very difficult. When I was a GDF officer and a bachelor, I used to live in the GDF officer's mess, and we used to live good. Our food was good and everything was great. But when I got married, and then I had to come home to a home and take care of my children and my wife, then I started to understand what the ordinary people were going through. The lack of flour, the lack of cooking oil, the lack of soap, toilet paper. And I started to wonder about these things. But you know what? And I saw Mr. Hite came into office in 1985, and I saw Mr. Hite transform Guyana. And Mr. Hite, I want to tell you, Mr. Hite is one of my heroes. If I had my way, I would build a statue for Desmond Hite. Desmond Hite was a champion for free enterprise, for democracy. I know that he had his challenges, but Desmond Hite brought back democracy to Guyana. Whether who want to like, who vex. Guyana, Desmond Hite brought back democracy to Guyana. And then the government changed in 1992. And I will have to tell you that while I don't take political sides, I'm a very proud Guyanese, and I take always the side of Guyana. And the side of Guyana that I take is the side that promotes private sector investment, that promotes the rule of law, that promotes democracy, and so on. And I remember in 1992, when we had those elections, I remember people running down the road and being violent on the streets. And they were supporters of the People's National Congress. And I could not understand why they would do that when we just came out of a fair and free elections in 1992, the first one in many, many years. And then we moved to 1997. And in all those years, my company was formed in 1992. And then my company started to evolve and grow. And then in 1997, we went back to fair and free elections again.
Right.
And in 1997, we had massive violence again in the streets of Georgetown, created again by supporters of the People's National Congress. Now, I mean, and these are people that I worked with all my life. And then I saw it happen again in 2001. And, you know, I never picked political sides. I always wanted to pick the side of the rule of law, what is good for Guyana, peace and stability. And then came 2006. And 2006 was the first time in the history of Guyana that we have had fair and free elections without violence. And Robert Corbyn was the leader of the PNC at the time. And we met him and we were very, very pleased. And from 2006 to 2011, we had the most amazing economic growth. This had nothing to do with political sides. This had to do with the facts. This had to do with investor confidence. Every day we wake up was a better day than yesterday and tomorrow. And we always look forward to tomorrow being a better day and so on.
Right.
And so to shorten this is to say to you, I may always come down on the side of what I believe is good for Guyana, on the side of democracy, on the side of the rule of law. If that side happens to coincide with the side of the PPP, it do not mean that I am on the PPP side. I'm on the side that the PPP seems to be on. And every time, like for example, when the no confidence motion happened, I was in the chambers of the parliament as a representative of the private sector to observe the vote. And I saw that vote happen, and I saw a fair vote happen. I saw everybody in parliament accepted that. 2 days afterwards, I saw a complete turnaround. I could not agree. I could not agree with the coalition for not going to elections in 3 months. And I was not pleased with them messing with mathematics. I fly planes, and mathematics, Yog, is my life. Mathematics is not an opinion, it's an exact science. And so because I can't agree on those things, people will say that you're a PPP. But I just want to end by saying I'm on the side of Guyana.
Well, one of the things I can tell everyone out there, for both you and Kit, is that I've known these two gentlemen, and I have had strong disagreements with both of them on many occasions at the private sector level. But it doesn't mean when it comes towards the development or doing what is right for our country that we don't all get together and say what's right. Kit, welcome to the show. And Kit, you were a former minister. I don't know if that was the highest position you got under the PNC government, but you were a former minister. How is it now, sir, you're calling out this government and calling them out for things like electoral issues and so forth?
Can you hear me, Yo?
Yes.
Good. Just checking, because I'm sitting on the banks of the Essequibo River, joining in this program. Yes, I was. I was Minister of State in this election.
Go ahead.
I was Minister of State in the office of the President of the People's National Congress. That is correct.
Mm-hmm. So let's get to our program, to our discussion then. And either one of you gentlemen can take the lead. But let's go back to March 2nd, 2020. What have you observed? What have you seen? And do you agree with the postmortem today of Mr. Norton that is saying these elections were not credible and they're no good and they were rigged by somebody? He basically said the PPP rigged the election for the APNU to, he didn't say for APNU to win, but obviously if they claim they win, then it means that PPP rigged this election for APNU to win. But gentlemen, take us through your experience from March 2nd to now, please.
Well, I could only tell you, as an observer, what I witnessed when Vibert Mengo, in fact, set out to rig this election. I witnessed Mengo refuse to use the statements of poll, which under the law he was required to use, and insert a spreadsheet which had no origin, which he couldn't define as to where it came from, was completely unsourced, in spite of the protests of the agents who were there. And I was sitting alongside all of the international observers at that time. And I personally witnessed Mengo set out to present a set of figures which were totally and absolutely false. We have seen that being evidenced already by the recount. We have seen that every vote that came out of the box since the recount has matched the statements of poll that are in the possession of all of the contesting parties, or most of them, certainly the two major ones. Certainly that those statements of poll are in the possession of David Granger and the APNU. They are certainly in the possession of the People's Progressive Party, and they're very much in the possession of many of the international observers and the local observers. Mm-hmm. And every vote that has come out of the box so far has endorsed those statements of poll and has shown that Mengo has absolutely manipulated the figures that he presented. So if Mr. Norton wants to say this election is rigged, he is absolutely right. It's been rigged by the party that he belongs to.
So thank you for that, Kid. Gerry, I want to come to you quickly. Sir, here is a strong allegation that has been made about these elections. I don't know how they could say it, but they said dead people voted and migrants, in lifted commas, voted. Now, Mr. Gildarie and I spoke today on radio, and we found it, we explained it as follows. If somebody voted for somebody else, it means a person voted twice. And based on the polling stations I went in, and the polling stations viewers and listeners went in, everybody was very vigilant. It was an impossible situation to have somebody vote twice. Yet these people are saying, and as of this afternoon, Gerry, one of the things that Mr. Norton said was that persons had multiple ID cards. Gerry, how can the dead vote, or how can migrants vote? What have you seen in this recount, sir? Your volume, Gerry.
Sorry. If this wasn't so serious, this was going to be very, very funny. It was going to be as funny as Freddie Kissoon's article 2 days ago. And I could not believe people took Freddie Kissoon's article so serious. But it describes a comical narrative that is being relayed every day. But I want to say I don't agree with Kit Nascimento that the APNU rigged these elections, I want to make it very clear. For I have been very close to GCOM as a private sector leader and observer since 2001, and particularly 6 and 11 and 15. And I want to tell you, I do not believe and that any political party could rig these elections. The elections are run by GCOM, and no political party could by themselves infiltrate the systems, the secure systems that is in place at GCOM to tamper or rig with the elections. What could possibly happen is if you have GCOM staff that is sympathetic to one political party or another, but then they themselves cannot operate, and they can't do it either because of the checks and balances. So I will say to you very, very clearly that it is exceptionally difficult, virtually impossible for anybody to rig these elections at the level of the voting, at the level of the counting of the ballot. The place that they had the weakness of these elections were at the returning officer level, and that is exactly where Mr. Mingo interfered with the elections. But I want to go back and tell you that particularly why these elections became so robust, because in 2006, when we were going to those elections, the PNC, including Mr. Alexander, they were protesting no verification, no vote. So the Private Sector Commission met with them and said, what do you mean no verification? They said that they wanted biometrics to prevent duplicants on the list, and so on. So in 2008, for the first time, biometrics was introduced in the GCOM registration system. So in 2008, we had a completely scrapping of the old manual, so to speak, registration system. And an entire new house-to-house registration was done in 2008 using biometrics. So every voter, you could have a similar face, but you can't have a similar fingerprint. So every single voter that was registered had to have their fingerprints taken. The fingerprints were scanned into the computer program along with all your biodata. And then every single voter had to present yourself physically, because GCOM, the only way you get on the list is when GCOM find you at the place you said you were living. So it was resident, not residency. So GCOM had to come and find you there physically. So the list in 2008 became a masterful list, one where it was a brand new list done with brand new house-to-house registration. But the most spectacular thing that happened on compound with the fingerprints was the continuous cycles of registration. So GCOM then decided to introduce the continuous cycles of registration so that we don't have to do house-to-house registration every 5 years for an election. So that what would happen, you would open up these continuous cycles of registration centers all across Guyana. And so people like myself, as a pilot, loggers and miners and overseas-based Guyanese and Amerindians who move all the time, a lot of times when they come to register at home, we were not at home. So when you open the continuous cycles of registration every year, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year, people could now go into those centers and register. So it became the most efficient and effective way of now capturing people who never registered before. And then you have overseas-based Guyanese that was coming home, and they're very, very proud to have their ID card. And so they would go into these centers, and they were registered and get their ID cards. And so over the last 10 years, you've had thousands and thousands of Guyanese coming back home, thousands of people like myself who did not register before are now being able to register. And so the list became a very robust list. Now, ever so often, GCOM then sends that list back to the manufacturer of the software, and they would scan the software for duplicates. And so the list is a very, very clean and secure list that, first of all, to get onto the list, it's a very secure system to get on, and to get off, it's also a very highly legal system. So if you die, now GPO sends every month a list of dead people to GCOM, and GCOM is meant to clean the list with those dead people. Obviously, you would have a problem with the people who live overseas. Sometimes you don't always get their death certificates. But what was important is that dead people can't vote. And I will tell you, under the present GCOM system, nobody, it is absolutely impossible. And I make this, I stake every part of my repetition on this when I say to you, it is impossible for somebody to vote for somebody else unless you have a massive conspiracy in the voting booth with the GCOM staff and one political party that want to do it, and then they evict everybody else, all the other parties, out of the station. Especially this elections in 2020, when you had 9 parties. You had 9 parties contesting these elections, and then you also had the highest number of foreign observers ever scrutinize the Guyanese elections in this 2020 elections. You had close to 250 foreign observers all over Guyana in every polling station, not in every single one, of course. They were picking random ones.
Right.
And then you had close to 500 or 600 local observers all over this country going into polling stations and sitting there. And they observed the vote, and they observed the count of the vote and the preparation of the SOPs. And I want to tell you, Yog, all of the foreign observers, not one single one, was a defiant voice. Every single person swear for the efficiency, for the transparency and the credibility of the electoral system. There was not one single report of any irregularity at any point in time, up to the point in time when Mingo interfered with the process. In every single returning officer's process across the country, without exception, there were foreign observers in the room observing the tabulation by the returning officers, and none of them, there was no report of any anomalies. Certainly, there was a call for a recount in Region 3, and when I found out about that and I asked why it didn't happen, I was told that the person who requested the recount was not qualified to do that. They requested a recount in Region 5. The recount in Region 5 started, and then it was stopped by the party who requested the recount because the count started to show up votes for the other party. And then the recount in Region 6 was about to start, and I understand the party who requested the recount demanded that they wanted new statements of poll. And in fact, the law says that you do the amendments on the old statements of poll. And when they couldn't get their hands on the new statements of poll, they abandoned in writing the request to count Region 6. And so those were 3 questions that you had, but there was none, zero. And let me just say, this is not a narrative. The narrative that was created is not a narrative created by the PPP or the Private Sector Commission or the local observers. Every single foreign observer was in that room at the Ashman's building. This is a narrative that was created by the Western world, who saw it with their own eyes. And these were the same people that endorsed the 2015 elections, came out publicly and endorsed that election. So,
but Gerry,
I just want to stop. No political party could rig these elections. No political party could rig these elections.
But here is what's happening, right? This entire process from March 3rd to now has probably been even a bigger campaign than pre-election campaign. This campaign has been about fooling people. So you still have, like online here, I have somebody who seems to be a terrorist, because when I check Mr. Qasim Soleimani, he is working, Leonard, he's working at the Iranian nuclear plant. And he's been cursing everyone. Sir, if you don't like the program, don't use abusive language. You can please get off. But coming back to the point, Gerry and Kit, here is what another gentleman is saying. And this, I find it to be extremely worrying that somebody could say this. They are alleging that persons could have voted more than once. One time they vote for themselves, another time they vote in their maiden name, another time they vote in some child name or something. Sir, you are forgetting that there is a folio existing in the polling station that has the people picture. So you can come how many times you want, but if you are saying that, sir, and Kit, I want to come back to you with this. If people are saying that GCOM officers took bribes, if people are saying that APNU people took bribe, because literally, Kit, it means APNU AFC is saying that all of its agents were bought over and they closed their eyes when people were voting, right? If that happened, Kit, it means over 10,000 people in this country were bought by somebody. And Gerry and Kit, it means we can never run another elections if 10,000 persons at one time could be bought. God help Guyana, because it means we can never run another elections. Kit, over to you.
Well, I think you've answered your own question to some extent. But let me say why I am now convinced that this election has indeed been rigged on behalf of the People's National Congress. First, judge the behavior of the so-called APNU AFC since Mr. Mango's intervention. Before Mango actually set out to rig the tabulation, all of the major political parties had the results in their hands, even before he started to tabulate Region 4. That is why Mango did what he did, because APNU had the statement to poll and knew that they had lost. In order to avoid a decision showing that they had lost, they did something. Their agent did something, and their agent was Mango. But let's move on from Mango. Mr. Lowenfield, who is the Chief Executive Officer, embraced the decisions made by Mango. Not once, but twice, Mango presented false figures for the world to see. But nevertheless, Mr. Lowenfield embraced that presentation and presented a declaration showing that APNU AFC had won using false figures.
Kit, sorry to interject. The commissioner, GCOM's commissioner, Vincent Alexander, said 2 nights ago that Lowenfield has no place, cannot object, interject, intervene with the returning officer. He can only receive a report or a declaration from the returning officer. So I think in his... go on.
You've been a chief executive officer. That's absolute nonsense.
Correct.
A chief executive officer runs a show.
No, not necessarily. And I think, Yog, I think that was made very clear. What I use is Mr. Nascimento saying that the chief elections officer could at any time step in and take over the role of any returning officer, maybe in District 6, District 10, whatever.
Yes, he can. He can remove the returning officers at any time. He can appoint other returning officers.
Could he step in and do the declaration of the returning officer?
Could I tell you what happened at
He didn't do that. I'm not saying he did that.
No, I'm asking whether he could do that.
Please.
Yes.
Could I just
say
this?
He did not do that.
Let me just say, Lowenfield actually did intervene at Region 4, at the Ashwin buildings, when Mingo started. Let me just make this very clear. At 2 o'clock on Tuesday morning.
I was there, Gerry. I saw him. He did intervene. On numerous occasions.
Okay. So to say that
don't tell me he can't intervene.
But Kit, let me just explain how he intervened. Kit.
He came into the room and intervened.
Okay.
But let me just say this, Yog. So when the 2 young ladies was reading off Mingo's spreadsheet numbers and people protest against what was happening, Lowenfield came into the room and Lowenfield said, I will do a test on 2 or 3 of the SOPs. And he did the test in front of everybody, and all 2 or 3 of them were invalid. And so he went back, and the commission had an emergency meeting upstairs, and Lowenfield came back downstairs into the room, and there's documented evidence to prove this. And Lowenfield said, we are sorry, we are going to cancel what just happened, what was going on for the longest while with the spreadsheet, and we are going to start over. And he explained how it is going to be done. They're going to put it up on a screen, and they will call SOP for SOP, and they will go until it's finished until the next day. Lowenfield have the power to do exactly what a chief executive officer does.
So Leonard, to answer, Leonard, to answer your question, that is an important distinction.
Frankly, we're wasting time talking about that. And I want to continue saying what I was saying. If I
Go ahead, Kit. Go ahead.
There is only one beneficiary. We know from the statements of poll who the winner is. There's only one beneficiary from turning that around and giving a false result, and that is APNU AFC. Now, when David Granger held his press conference a couple of days ago on Sunday, when he came down to GCOM and held a press conference, he was asked point blank, would you accept the results of the recount? And on 2 occasions, he refused to answer that question. He kept on by saying he would accept what the chairman of GCOM decided on the matter. Well, you know, the chairman of GCOM is the chairman of a commission which has 3 APNU appointed representatives and 3 PPP representatives. And they will always differ on the issues that we are talking about. So who really runs the commission? It's the chairman. Miss Claudette Singh makes the decisions for that commission. And judged by the behavior of the commissioners that were appointed to that commission by David Granger, no less. They are his men on that commission. And judged by their behavior, they have sought to embrace this fraud from the very beginning. It is clear who initiated this fraud. Gerry can disagree with me all he wants. It's clear who is benefiting from this fraud. It is clear who, during the recount, who are the representatives at that recount. They are all from APNU who are delaying the recount. They find every reason to delay it. Why, if the recount reveals that APNU has won, why do we have the APNU agents, party agents, at every single station? And I can tell you, we speak from direct experience because the private sector commission observers are at every one of those stations. Right. And at every one of those stations, the interruptions, the attempts to delay, they are coming from the APNU agents. Why delay a recount that will reveal the truth if you are not guilty? And whose agents are those, may I ask? They're David Granger's agents. And whose candidate went to court to try and stop the recount in the first place? David Granger's candidate. So don't tell me that David Granger is innocent of this. Don't tell me that APNU is innocent of this. So it is very clear, even to a half-blind man, what is occurring here.
So, Gerry, I want to come back to you with something.
No, if I may, Yog, if I may ask Mr. Nascimento this question here. He spoke about the commissioners and about the chairman making some decisions, but I want to ask him, does he feel, or what does he say to the fact that the chairperson was the one that was proposed by the opposition leader, and then okayed by the president?
What's your point?
Well, I'm asking you. You seem to be saying that she's in control, or that's the conclusion that I'm hearing. That she seems to be.
She is in control. She has a casting vote.
She has the casting vote, but she seems to be casting in favor of the APNU all the time. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's pretty obvious so far.
So
we'll see.
Let's Gerry, I want to come back to you from the following perspective. There is another narrative coming out that people are saying we are concentrating on Mingo, Mingo, Mingo. In fact, somebody was singing it all day. The point is, never, not in recent history, has there been such a blatant, as Golden said, such a transparent effort to rig these elections. Right. But Gerry, a couple of things that I want to quickly, and then here is what I want you to answer. Does Mr. Lowenfield, did he have a copy of the SOPs in your mind or to your knowledge? And if he did, why did he still proceed to receive Mingo's false declaration? Because it means Lowenfield knows those numbers are wrong. And he was presenting a report to GCOM. And finally, on that note, sir, why is it that GCOM still has that declaration on its website?
Yog, at the end of the vote, at the end of the tally of the vote at the polling station, and they prepare the GCOM statements of poll, which they prepare in carbon copies and triplicates and so on. These are all GCOM statements of poll. They don't belong to anybody else. GCOM then posts one outside the door. They give every party agent one, and then they send two of those. One goes to the returning officer, and one goes to Lowenfield. The one that goes to Lowenfield goes up into the command center of GCOM, and GCOM then passes that through the commissioners. Every commissioner will sign off those statements of poll. It goes into the technical room, to the IT room of GCOM, where they will do the regional tabulation, so that when the returning officer is about to make his declaration, Lowenfield is in possession of a number that he could compare our own numbers with. And so Lowenfield definitely have copies of the exact statements of poll that Mingo has, and Lowenfield technical staff in the IT room of GCOM was in the process of doing the tabulation as well. So your question is a good question. Why did Lowenfield, knowing what the correct results are, even as his staff in the IT section was doing the regional tabulation as well, which he'd already agreed on for the other 9 regions, why did he not stop why did he accept? And this is important. When Mr. Mingo did the first one and the court vitiated and said it was bad and he should go back and do it correct, Mr. Mingo came back into GCOM in the Ashland buildings and completely defied the court. He went into that building and he started reading from a spreadsheet again. And he read over 600 of those results, fraudulent numbers, and put that into his tabulation. And then when the court sent for him, when they moved the contempt of court proceedings against him, he left GCOM and he went to the courthouse. And his staff continued reading those numbers, those illegal numbers, and they read over 800 of those. So there's 879. By the time Mr. Mingo came back from the court, when the judge ordered him to go back and do it correct, and he moved the process to Kingston, and he put up this dirty white sheet on a piece of cardboard 30 feet away under a shed, Mr. Mingo only did 80. He only did 80 on the display of this dirty white sheet that the court told him to do. So Mr. Mingo, 90% of what he did for the second time was also in defiance of the court instructions. And Lowenfield knew what had happened, and Lowenfield should have stopped it. The good news is, and let me just say this to you, and I don't agree with Kit again, just to say to you that the chairperson of GCOM, I think she was dropped. And I want to give me 1 second to say this to you. Mm-hmm. When Mr. Surajbadi became the chairman of GCOM. Mr. Surajbadi became the chairman of GCOM, and he spent about 3 to 4 years getting himself climatized before the 2006 elections, because he came in after the 2001 elections, and Mr. Surajbadi had enough time to climatize. When I think about Justice Singh, what happened to her, she was dropped in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in a perfect storm, and she had no knowledge of these things. So she got into the middle of an election cycle a couple months before the election, and she had warring factions sitting in front of her, left, right, and center. And she had Mr. Patterson, the illegal guy that President Granger had illegally implanted, and had just left. And so she was trying to clean up a lot of the things that was happening, and she was dealing with both sides, and she didn't know who to trust. And I will say to you, on the night of the 4th of March, I was in the GCOM building when the girls were doing the tabulation correctly after Lowenfield told them what to do, and they were doing it correctly. And then they said they got tired after about 2 or 3 hours. And people started to get upset because GCOM didn't have a replacement staff. I went upstairs and I found the chairperson of GCOM, the justice. And I asked her to come downstairs with me to speak to the people in the room and calm them down. And she and I walked down the steps. She went and she spoke to them. And on the way back up, we got upstairs and we sat in a chair. And she said to me, she said, "Gerry, I am guaranteeing you that we will do a recount of these ballots." This is on the 4th. This is on the 4th of March. She said, "I will do a recount." And I want to tell you, whatever people say about the chairperson of GCOM, she kept her word. And I want to say this as well to you, that the first day that I went to that recount center, and I was there many, many days, what is going on at that recount center is world class. You will be proud of it. Guyanese all over the world will be proud of what is going on there. It is efficient, it is transparent, it is credible, and the police that is there is extremely courteous. The medical staff, the GCOM staff is very diligent, and they're working very, very hard. What is happening, of course, is because they don't have enough stations, and so it's going slow. And then coupled with what Kit said, there's been this constant interruption of a process.
Upstairs quickly, where I have my
sorry.
Quick, fast.
Sorry with that.
Where I have the connection.
Yeah.
Right. In the meantime, could I ask the captain some quick questions on the issue of diplomacy, Captain? We have seen on elections day, March the 2nd, you would have been flying around with the U.S. ambassador, the British High Commission, and so on around the country, several places. After that, there were many criticisms as to the role of the diplomats in Guyana. The coalition is saying that they were supposed to observe and not did what they did. A lot of criticisms and issuing of statements. My question to you: do you know of any country in the world where diplomats would have been so active like they were in Guyana? And do you agree with the coalition when they said that the diplomats would have intervened, would have been overreaching the boundaries?
Let me be very clear. What I did with the embassy staff in 2020 is exactly what we did in 2015. I flew the embassy staff around the country, exactly the same place. The U.S. Embassy, the Canadian Embassy, the British Embassy, exactly the same place. And they did exactly what they did in 2015, they did in 2020. And I want to tell you, Guyana should be very grateful for the work and service that the ABC countries offer to Guyana. Even before the elections, we had people embedded in GCOM giving technical advice. We had people from the European Union. We had American technical people in GCOM. We had the Canadians paying for people the Canadian chief election officer was there. Canada then financed the Carter Center. These ABC countries never interfere. They provided assistance. And let me tell you, I was there in the GCOM building the day when this thing happened, and I will also put my reputation in the line. None of them interfered in the process. They were standing there in total amazement that anybody in 2020 could attempt to steal an election so blatantly and disrespectful and so transparent in front of every streaming camera, every streaming smartphone in that room, and there were hundreds of them, and people were standing there in total amazement. The ambassadors never, ever, ever interfere. The ambassadors have a very good working relationship with the chairperson of GCOM, and from time to time, the chairperson of GCOM, because that is where she got the assistance for GCOM. Never once did they interfere. And there was a lot of rumors about how people invade the GCOM office. That is not true. People were in there they were going through the process. When this place got out of control, in my view, is when Mr. Mingo came out of the hospital, from the intensive care of the hospital on the Thursday, with a piece of paper and said, I am here to declare the results. And people say, but how could you declare the results when we have not finished tabulating the results? And Mr. Mingo went ahead to try to start declaring the results, and people shout him down. So there was no invasion of GCOM. And then at one point in time, there was a rumor that the chairperson was in her office and she was sick and the doors were locked, and people started to get worried about her. And so people rushed up the step because they were not seeing her. But at no point in time was the GCOM office invaded by anybody. There was a lot of professionals, highly respected people in that room, and particularly the ABC ambassadors. I will tell you, all of them, they have never interfered in the internal affairs of Guyana. They have provided guidance, and they commented on issues which was blatant and disrespectful.
Thank you, Gerry. And to viewers and listeners, let me just share this with you. Two things I'll say. One, and Gerry, let me say a public thank you for your introduction to former Prime Minister Mitchell of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And viewers and listeners, I raise that because all of these leaders across the world, across the Caribbean, we need to listen to them, because a lot of the people in 1992, the world looked in on Guyana, and the world played a major role in ensuring that democracy prevailed. And a lot of these leaders are now looking on, as Golding said, with sadness to see what is happening to this democracy. But Gerry, there is another dimension, somehow or the other. People want to tell this nation that a man could read some fabricated numbers from a handwritten sheet, and everybody in the room must stay quiet like sheep and take it and go and file an election petition. And that, my friend, is probably one of the worst things of expectations I've ever seen, because I've heard one senior politician say, why was there ruckus? Why was everybody protesting? You were the ones that disrupted. What did they expect? A room full of sheep? But Gerry, let's come to the recount center, sir. You are there every day.
Yog, I want to say something to you. I came to this radio program, I believe it was a day after, and Gildarie will tell you, tears came to my eyes when the democracy of Guyana was threatened, and the democracy of Guyana was, these people were attempting to steal our democracy. I have never felt the rage I felt, the disrespect I felt. And you know, when the people in the East Coast started to protest in the streets, in all my life, I have never seen people spontaneously hit the streets with such anger. But people were angry across this country for the disrespect that Mr. Mingo and whoever it is, his handlers, were demonstrating to Guyanese that day and in front of the world. So I want to tell you, you're very right. People were enraged. Tears came to my eyes in that room, and it came to my eyes on your program, because I do not want to live in a country where my freedoms and my democracy is an option for somebody else. I want to be able to vote the government out in 2020 if I don't like them.
Correct. So Captain, I want to come to the recount, the activity that you both are overlooking every day. And relate to us, sir, both of you, if you can, how is it? How are you viewing this process, and what is your view of the huge numbers of observations that are being raised at each workstation?
Let me say to you, the counting stations, first of all, it is exceptionally transparent, efficient, And I must give Lowenfield a lot of credit for what he is doing at that, because that is obviously, Lowenfield and myself were in the military together. We understand logistics and management of people. And I could see Lowenfield training. I could see, when you look at it, the way the ballot boxes are coming into the counting stations with the escorts, the way it is done when it is open, when the ballots are put under the cameras. I mean, it is exceptionally transparent. And all of the observers and the party agents are sitting in the room and they're watching it and they're concurring with everything. And then when you go to the tabulation room in the dome of the convention center, let me tell you, they are now setting a new standard for the way election, they say anybody, and not the voting, it's the counting. I think Stalin had said so.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who count, it doesn't matter who you vote for, it's who counting the votes. Well, this time they're counting those votes in front of the country and the world in a transparent way. And I am exceptionally impressed and gratified for what GCOM is doing at the moment. This matter with the observations and so on, this is not an audit going on here. This is not, and any elections and any kind of administrative operations like that, you are going to have flaws and mistakes, and you're going to have administrative issues, but it is not where people are interfering with the vote. But the parties got a right to make their observation. What we are seeing, though, is a predomination of craziness. But this thing with dead people and somebody voting for somebody else, and I think it's a complete waste of time. But you know what? You have to listen to it. You have to listen to it.
But Gerry, also semper necessitas, right? He who asserts must prove. And I think the chairman made a very profound statement yesterday, didn't she?
Absolutely. And she's right. And she is right. You know what? I see this. I am actually very, very optimistic. I want to make this very clear to you. Nobody could interfere with this process now at the counting center. If anybody attempt to interfere with it, they will be caught immediately and the whole world will know. I want to tell you, we are in contact with the entire world. So while the Carter Center may not be here, everybody in the world know exactly what is happening here, blow by blow. And so anybody attempt to interfere with this counting process and stop it from its logical conclusion where it's going at the end of the process, where we will once and for all know what the numbers in those ballot boxes are, will be caught. So I am very optimistic that this process will lead to the right conclusion and that a lawful, legitimate government will be sworn in at the end of this exercise. So I am very, very optimistic and pleased with it.
Thank you, Gerry. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we are at that time when we have to wrap up our program. It's been a wonderful chat. And to the private sector observers that have been on tonight, I would want to ensure that we can get you gentlemen back again, maybe in a week, maybe in a week and a half time, to continue giving us an update of what's happening there. Before we leave, gentlemen, Kit, your final comment, sir. Kindly unmute. Unmute.
Kit, unmute your microphone there.
Yes.
But while you're waiting, Kit, let me say this to you in my final backup, so Kit to get himself prepared. People ask the question, why would the Private Sector Commission be so involved in the issue of governance and security and stability of our country? Our businesses, Yog, cannot grow. Our employees cannot live safe lives if issues of democracy and the rule of law are not respected in Guyana. The Private Sector Commission have always been involved in election monitoring. We meet with GCOM 4 or 5 times every year. We meet with all the political parties because we pay close attention to the issue of national security, stability, democracy, the governance of Guyana, because that is how our businesses will grow. And as you could see, these elections have actually derailed our business, which is compounded with this COVID-19. And now businesses are collapsing all over Guyana, not only because of the COVID-19, but because we cannot run a country where our government is not legitimate.
Thank you. Thank you. And Leonard, I hate to call out some people, but I wish to call it Mr. Rohi. Mr. Rohi, the programs here are not to please you or your views, sir. It is to get everybody's views out there. Kit, your final thoughts, sir.
I've been having trouble receiving you, so are you receiving me?
Yes, I am.
This really is a very simple issue. It is whether we've had a credible election. To date, because of the behavior of Mengo, because of the rigging that has taken place, we have not had a credible election. When Mr. Lowenfield presented or made, he didn't present it, but when he declared a false result, he presented it to the chairman of the commission. She had two choices. She could have put it before the commission, and the commission could have voted and rejected it. And that would have been the end of that. She chose instead, in her own good judgment, to put it in abeyance. So in fact, the Lowenfield declaration